nuclear-powered Burevestnik cruise missile. The Kremlin insists the test poses no threat to relations with Washington. Officials say the launch is part of efforts to ensure Russia's national security as tensions rise in Europe. Moscow defends the development of new weapons, calling it a necessary response to what it calls a growing militarist mood. Earlier, U.S. President Donald Trump has commented that his counterpart Vladimir Putin should end the Ukraine war instead of testing missiles. The Kremlin reacted to Trump's statements, saying that Russia will act based on its own national interests. Russia said it has informed the United States in advance about the recent test of its nuclear-powered Burevestnik cruise missile. The Kremlin insists the test poses no threat to relations with Washington. Officials say the launch is part of efforts to ensure Russia's national security as tensions rise in Europe. Moscow has defended the development of new weapons, calling it a necessary response to what it calls a growing militarist mood. Earlier, U.S. President Donald Trump has commented that his counterpart, Vladimir Putin, should end the Ukraine war instead of testing missiles. The Kremlin has reacted to Trump's statements, saying that Russia will act based on its own national interests. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has stated that Kyiv is asking the United States for weapons similar to Tomahawk missiles that require minimal training to operate. Earlier, U.S. President Donald Trump has said that he could not comment on supplying Tomahawks in Ukraine, but warned it could lead to a major escalation in the war. President Trump has said the U.S. needs those weapons for its own defense and emphasized that his focus is on making a deal to end the conflict. Meanwhile, in an interview, Zelensky has also made comments on a ceasefire, saying that Ukraine and its allies will draft a plan for a ceasefire within the next 10 days. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has stated that Kyiv is asking the United States for weapons similar to Tomahawk missiles that require minimal training to operate. Earlier, U.S. President Donald Trump stated that he could not comment on supplying Tomahawks to Ukraine, but warned it could lead to a major escalation in the war. Trump has stated the U.S. needs those weapons for its own defense and has emphasized that his focus is on making a deal to end the conflict. Now for this discussion, we welcome Ben Aris. He's a journalist, joins us live from Berlin. Thank you very much, Ben, for joining us. Good to see you. And now, how might Russia's advance notification to U.S. about its this particular missile and missile test, does it change anything, or does it escalate the military tensions between these two? Could this lead to arms race?
Well, there's two aspects to this. The trouble with the new missile is that it's nuclear capable. And there's a test ban treaty in place that everyone's respecting, not to test nuclear weapons. This wasn't carrying a nuclear warhead. Nevertheless, it could have done. And from that point of view, the Russians were being cautious. They were warning the US that they were going to fire this missile in order to head off any possibility that it was seen as a first strike, and that there would be some automatic response from the states, that the states would take it as a nuclear launch and then fire their own missiles back. And that's protocol, that's normal. But on the other hand, of course, the fact that they're rolling out this missile in the middle of the whole debate about sending Tomahawk missiles to the Ukraine, it's a warning. And the thing with the Tomahawks is that it's also nuclear capable. And the Russian objection to sending Tomahawks to Ukraine is they're saying, if you fire these missiles at Russia, then we don't know it's not carrying a nuclear warhead when it takes off. Of course, it probably wouldn't. No one wants to start a nuclear war, but the Russian point is that the danger is there, and that this is massively escalatory in terms of the tensions. And so, yes, we are in a nuclear arms race, or an arms race in general, in the sense that both sides are ramping up the kind of missiles that they're testing or the saber rattling that they're doing, where these things are nuclear capable, and that's a new stage.
Does the successful test of Russia's this particular missile change the balance of nuclear deterrence between these two powers? What do you think?
I think we're seeing a slow escalation. I mean, it's been going on and on since the beginning of the war. It started off with Javelin missiles, which are anti-tank missiles that you launch from your shoulder. And then we went up to Leopard tanks, and then we went up to F-16s. And now we're talking about new classes of increasingly powerful nuclear weapons or nuclear weapon capable missiles that are being traded. And we're going towards Third World War slowly in incremental steps, as each side is unprepared to back off. Putin in particular is sticking to his maximalist demands. Trump is getting frustrated, so Trump floated the idea of possibly sending Tomahawks to Ukraine, and the Kremlin's come back with like, look, here's yet another missile that we've developed. The Ukrainians on their side have developed a thing called the Flamingo, which is their own homemade cruise missile that can hit targets 3,000 kilometers away. And most of the missiles that the states have sent, the HIMARS and the ATCMSs, those have ranges of like 200 or 300 kilometers. So again, this is another escalation.
And now, how should supplying advanced weapons like, how should U.S. consider supplying advanced weapons like Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine, despite the risk of escalating the conflict? Do you think it should still consider, or what should it do?
The thing with the Tomahawks, I see it purely as a sort of diplomatic bluff, in so much as the Tomahawks themselves were designed to be fired from ships. There isn't a land-based version. And of course, Ukraine has no navy. You can also fire them from planes, but again, you need big strategic bombers to fire a missile like that, the Tomahawk. And Ukraine doesn't have those either. So this is all part of the shell game that's going on over the negotiations, that Trump is frustrated because Putin refuses to end the war, he refuses to make any concessions or compromise, he's still sticking with his maximalist demands. That boils down to Ukraine has to sign over the whole of the Donbass. It doesn't occupy the whole of the Donbass. Putin's insisting it signs the whole thing over to Russia and recognizes Russian sovereignty over the Donbass, and at the same time that Ukraine has to abandon its NATO aspirations. And Ukraine is doing neither of those things, but Putin's not prepared to compromise either. So the White House is looking for ways to pressure the Kremlin into coming to the negotiating table. And there's two strategies there. One is to offer or suggest that it might send Tomahawks, even though they can't be used. And the other is, of course, that Trump has finally, after whatever it is, 8-9 months in office, finally imposed oil sanctions on Russia, very painful ones. So it's just, you know, the diplomatic row has gone up. Trump has been very open to talking to Putin. He wants to do a minerals deal with Russia, but that's not coming. And so now suddenly we're into this next stage where everything has been ratcheted up.
Thank you very much, Ben Aris, for sharing that insight. Please stay with us as we come back to you for our next discussion as well. Now, we stay on this topic. Russia's defense ministry has said that its forces have captured 3 key settlements in eastern Ukraine. The ministry reports that Russian troops now control Yehorivka in the Dnipropetrovsk region, along with Novomykolaiv and Privlin in the Zaporizhzhia region. Moscow calls the advance a significant step in securing the southern front. Ukrainian officials have not yet commented on these claims. The development comes as fighting intensifies across multiple fronts, with both sides seeking to strengthen their positions ahead of the winter. Now we move on to our next news. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and North Korean Foreign Minister Choi Son-hui has held talks in Moscow earlier today. After her talks with Lavrov, Choi Son-hui is now expected to meet Russian President Vladimir Putin. The Kremlin spokesperson has confirmed that Putin will host the North Korean diplomat later in the day. The meeting aims to strengthen their military and political ties between the two countries, particularly in the context of the ongoing war with Ukraine. The meeting between Putin and Choi is the latest in a series of diplomatic exchanges between Russia and North Korea. It also follows a recent pledge taken by North Korean Supreme Leader Kim Jong-un to advance military ties with Moscow. Last year, Putin and North Korean leader has also signed a mutual defense pact. Since then, North Korea has sent thousands of troops to assist Russia in the western Kursk region against Ukrainian forces. Now for this discussion, we welcome back Ben Ayres. He's a journalist, joins us live from Berlin. Thank you very much, Ben, for staying with us. Now, what more can you tell us about the growing military cooperation between Russia and North Korea, and how does it affect regional security in East Asia and global power dynamics? Ben, you might be muted here. If you could unmute yourself.
Sorry, is that better?
Yes, I can hear you now. Should I repeat the question?
No, I got the question.
Perfect.
So the
Thank
friendship between North Korea and Russia, I mean, they've always been friends. That North Korea, pretty much the only country, Western power or European power that it has any kind of relationships with is Russia. And that was true going back to Kim Jong-il, the father of Kim Jong-un. And what's happened during the war is that North Korea has been a pariah, of course, and yet Russia's always held the door open to it, and now it's become extraordinarily useful. Russia's been supplying it with weapons, particularly shells, and now that Russia's in a war itself and has need of those shells, that Kim Jong-un has been sending them back to Russia to support it militarily. And moreover, they've actually deepened their relationships. They've signed a mutual security pact, NATO-like security pact, in so much as Russia has guaranteed North Korea's security should it be attacked. Russia will come to its aid in the same way a NATO member will protect a NATO member, which makes North Korea sort of impregnable or impune to pressure from the rest of the world. And it being a nuclear power means that you've also got this trident now of North Korea and Russia, together with countries like China and Iran, who formed this bloc, this anti-Western bloc, and are militarily supporting each other, although it's all done under the table so that no one's admitting to it. But Iran is also supplying Russia with drones, and China is supplying Russia with dual use. It's not overtly sending military supplies to Russia, but it is sending lots of useful things, particularly technology and chips, so that Russia can continue to build its missiles. So this is extremely destabilizing because countries in the Southeast Asia region, particularly South Korea, are looking at this growing friendship, this increasingly aggressive, militarized relationship between North Korea and Russia with great concern, because it threatens them directly that Korean War may break out again, or there's also the possibility of China attacking Taiwan, and then this bloc that sits above it would be extremely strategically important.
And do you think the sanctions that have been put into Russia, how effective are they, and also the 19 sanctions that have recently been put on Russia, and should the international community impose new sanctions or take diplomatic action in response to North Korea's support for Russia?
The sanctions have been extraordinarily ineffective. I mean, here we are 4 years into the war. They are having an effect on the Russian economy, but the main economic problems in Russia are not due to sanctions. It's managed to find ways around all of the sanctions, pretty much all of them. In just 4 months, when the European Union put oil sanctions on Russia, it managed to pivot its entire oil trade to Southeast Asia, largely China and India. And so it's earning as much money as it did before. If anything, it's earning more money than it did before the war with these new customers. And the 19th package of sanctions that the EU just put in place, again, those have bounced back, and I would argue that actually they've done more damage to the European Union than they have done to Russia. Germany's in recession. France is in budget meltdown. The government's already collapsed. The UK is close to a debt crisis. The economies aren't working. Inflation's going up, and there's been a massive deindustrialization going on in Europe as all the heavy industry cuts off from cheap Russian gas, which was powering the whole of the European growth, particularly Germany's growth. It's not happening, and companies are decamping. Russia is under extreme budget pressure this year. The deficit's tripled the estimate, and it's going to only grow by 0.6% this year. But it'll recover. I mean, it still has plenty in reserve. And the central bank is dealing with the inflation problem, and so it's going to cut rates, and hopefully growth will resume. But of course, it's been hurt a lot. I don't see what they can do in terms of sanctions except for the nuclear option, which is to ban Russian oil from reaching the international markets completely. That could cause Russia to collapse. But then that comes with an oil price spike from wherever it is now, about $64. Could shoot up. Morgan Stanley estimated it could go up to $350 a barrel. And if that happens, then you have a global recession, you have global meltdown. And particularly in the States, politically, that's suicide. Because at the moment, the price at the pump is whatever it is, $3-4. But if it shoots up to $10, and you've got midterms in the States next year, and the American population is extremely sensitive to the price of oil.
Yes, thank you very much, Ben Arias, for sharing that insight and staying with us throughout our news as a journalist and from Berlin. Thank you. Now we move on to our next news. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney has stated that he is ready to engage in trade talks with U.S. President Donald Trump. This comes after the U.S. imposed an additional 10% tariff on Canadian goods. Now Carney made these comments at a regional summit in Malaysia, where President Trump had also been present before leaving for Japan. The Canadian Prime Minister has, however, clarified that he did not have any contact with President Trump while in Kuala Lumpur. This situation follows a tense moment in the trade relations between these two countries. Last Thursday, Trump terminated all trade talks with Canada after a controversial anti-tariff ad campaign was released by the Ontario provincial government. The ad used footage of former U.S. President Ronald Reagan and carried a message warning against the impact of high tariffs. This was criticized by the U.S. president as, according to him, the ad misleadingly presented Reagan's views on tariffs and caused confusion regarding U.S. trade policy. Moreover, the Ronald Reagan Foundation too accused Ontario of using selective footage and said that it was reviewing its legal options. In a move to ease tensions between these two countries, Ontario has announced last Friday that it would pull the ad and work towards resuming negotiations. Now for this discussion, we welcome Peter Cardillo. He's a chief market economist at Spartan Capital Securities, joins us live from New York. Thank you very much, Peter, for joining us again. Good to see you. Peter,
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Now, Peter, should Canada continue to seek negotiations with the U.S. despite escalating tariffs as well as political disagreements?
Yeah, well, I think that sooner or later, this political rift and this trade war between China and many other countries as well is going to come to some sort of solution. Obviously, Canada aggravated the situation by running an ad that was not welcomed here in the United States. And so President Trump imposed an extra 10%. But I think, that is not going to be long lasting. And I think that we'll get some sort of a solution. If you look what's happening within Asia, President Trump seems to be very optimistic, very upbeat that he's probably going to strike a deal with China, and a framework has already been put in place, and with other Asian countries as well. So I think it's important to realize that I've said this many of times before, and I'll repeat it again, that no one wins in a trade war, and so you need to come to a mutual agreement, and I think that agreement is getting very close. We're into this trade war now, or about what, 4 or 5 months, and so it's imperative for all the economies on a global scale to be able to trade and not ruin their economies, and that goes for the United States as well. And President Trump knows that, so does the administration know that, the Chinese know that, everyone knows that. And so it's just a matter of time before trade deals are struck.
Yes, and going back to this, thank you for emphasizing that. And Peter, as we saw that anti-tariff ad campaign, which used President Ronald Reagan's audio, video, this led to somewhat escalation. So what role should provincial governments like Ontario play in shaping Canada's international trade relations?
Well, look, Canada is a big trading partner of the United States. It's right on our borders. They're our next door neighbors. And the United States has always